Hello everyone, Clorinde's kit has finally been officially revealed in the Genshin 4.7 livestream. She's gone through some ups and downs during the 4.7 beta cycle, and while I've already discussed her changes in my previous videos, I wanted to sum up everything about Clorinde in one final guide. I'll be explaining how Clorinde works, the best ways to build her potential best teams, and analyzing her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Pretty much everything you need to know with simple and practical explanations, while also giving more detailed analysis that is backed by TC. So with that, let's get right into it. Clorinde is a 5-star Electro Sword main DPS that ascends with crit rate. She is a fast-paced character, hitting enemies quickly and having a lot of multi-hits in a lot of her attacks. So she won't necessarily do big individual damage numbers, but a lot of smaller damage numbers that add up together. Her kit plays around Bond of Life, making her the second Bond of Life oriented DPS released. Clorinde's overall gameplay loop is similar to Ayato's, where the skill makes your attacks enhanced and you'll only be doing damage in this enhanced state. Because of this, while Clorinde's normal attacks look cool, she will not be using any of these multipliers in her normal talent if you're playing her properly, so you can safely ignore leveling this. The majority of Clorinde's kit lies in her skill. When you first press Clorinde's skill, which has a cooldown of 16 seconds, she enters an enhanced state called Night Vigil, which enhances her attacks for 7.5 seconds. While in this state, Clorinde can perform special normal attacks and special skill attacks, which differ in strength depending on her Bond of Life. Starting with her special normal attacks, where she shoots with her pistol and can also periodically trigger Usia aligned arc damage. If Clorinde has less than 100% Bond of Life, her attacks pierce, deal more damage, and grant Clorinde 35% Bond of Life. If she has more than 100% Bond of Life, her enhanced normals just deal less damage. Because of this, you want to only perform 3 enhanced normals before stopping, because after 3 of them, Clorinde will have 105% Bond of Life, so over 100%. So what do you do afterwards? That's where her enhanced skill comes in. When Clorinde uses her skill in her enhanced state, she performs a lunge attack that also differs in strength depending on Clorinde's Bond of Life. The only thing you need to know is that her lunge attack is at its strongest when Clorinde uses it when she has more than 100% Bond of Life. It does more damage, has larger AoE, and heals Clorinde's Bond of Life off. So the entire gameplay loop can be summarized as building up over 100% Bond of Life with 3 enhanced normal attacks, and then spending that Bond of Life using her enhanced skill, repeating the process until her Night Vigil enhanced state is over. Within the 7.5 second duration of Clorinde's enhanced state, you'll be able to perform this loop 5 times, so 5 and 3 E's. Now, to ensure this loop doesn't get messed up by external factors because it requires Bond of Life levels, Clorinde cannot receive external healing while she is in her enhanced state. Instead, any external healing gets converted to extra Bond of Life in a 1-to-1 ratio with her A4 passive. This, however, doesn't make her very vulnerable to enemy attacks because 1, if Clorinde is not in her enhanced state, like for instance when she's off field, Clorinde can still be healed. And 2, Clorinde can heal herself when she clears her Bond of Life with her lunge attack. After doing the math, each max damage lunge attack heals 10.5% of Clorinde's max HP. Since she can do 5 of these in an enhanced state, Clorinde heals about half of her HP bar every rotation, making her a pretty comfy on-fielder. Lastly, all of this damage that I've described is considered normal attack damage. I know this can get confusing for people when I said you can just ignore her normal talent, but ultimately, this is just a label for the type of damage the game recognizes an attack as. All of the multipliers still come from leveling the skill talent, the game just labels it as normal attack damage. Clorinde's burst competes with Arlecchino for being one of the best looking animations in the game, but what it does is pretty straightforward. It is just a nuke of damage, dealing 5 hits to enemies. However, it also gives Clorinde 120% Bond of Life. This allows Clorinde to perform 1 extra max damage lunge attack in her enhanced state. Because of the burst animation time and the importance of Clorinde's enhanced state, you'll want to use this burst anytime outside of her enhanced state. Now, you may have noticed that Clorinde's multipliers, especially on her skills hits, are fairly low. Sure, Clorinde attacks fast, so she gets a lot of them in, but if all she had were her skill, Clorinde's damage would be pretty bad. This is where her A1 passive comes in, which makes up a very big portion of her damage and is very important to her kit. When Clorinde or any of her teammates triggers an electro-related reaction, any of Clorinde's attacks that deal normal attack damage and her burst are increased based on 20% of her attack for 15 seconds. This buff can stack up to 3 times and has a cap. To max the buff, 3000 attack is needed. This effectively serves as adding a 60% multiplier to each of Clorinde's hits. To visualize how her A1 works, I've done the math on how her A1 damage is calculated with 1 and 3E in Clorinde's enhanced state. And by doing this, you can see that ignoring her burst, which also gets the buff, this A1 buff makes up like half of Clorinde's damage because her individual hits have low multipliers. This makes building attack to maximize her A1 buff very important. Now, the damage cap that her A1 has can get confusing confusing to understand, so I'll explain it with an example. If your Clorinde has 2800 attack, then all of that attack gets calculated into the talent and A1 multipliers of her hits. No attack goes to waste. If your Clorinde has 3200 attack, all of that attack does get multiplied by Clorinde's regular talent multiplier like normal. However, the multiplier from her A1 passive only considers 3000 of that attack because it has the cap. So 200 of your attack gets ignored in the A1 calculation part of her damage. And remember, in a single N3E, that A1 makes up around half of her damage, so that 200 attack is basically gaining half the value. Because of this cap, you don't want to necessarily over-invest in attack after 3000, and attack buffers like Bennett will not get as much value if you're already building a lot of attack. Finally, activation of this A1 buff is also really easy and pretty much guaranteed. It is not like Niviolette's passive where you need to trigger different reactions. The way Clorinde's passive is worded, you can just proc the same reaction 3 times, such as aggravate 3 times, and you'll fully stack the buff. I've touched on Clorinde's A4 passive briefly already, as it allows the 1-to-1 healing to Bond of Life conversion if Clorinde gets external healing while she's in her enhanced state. The main part of this passive, however, is that Clorinde can get up to 20% crit rate as long as she either gains or loses Bond of Life while she has at least 100% Bond of Life. Simply put, this passive activates when you use Clorinde's max damage lunge attack in her enhanced state, so you can just treat this as Clorinde getting 20% crit rate, which is great. Lastly, Clorinde's special passive displays Fontaine specialty resources on your map. Very cool. Ultimately, Clorinde's talent priority is pretty simple. Level her skill over the bursts, as her skill makes up most of her kit, and you can safely ignore her normal talent. With her kit explanations out of the way, what does this mean for Clorinde's overall gameplay? The general rotation is fairly simple. We will first want to set up our support skills, then burst on Clorinde if you have it, which will immediately give Bond of Life. Then you can press Clorinde's skill to enter her enhanced Night Vigil state. With the Bond of Life from a burst, we can immediately fit in a max damage lunge attack, clearing the Bond of Life. Then we can do the normal gameplay loop of 3 and 3Es until Clorinde's enhanced state is over, fitting a total of 5 and 3Es. Then you can go back to your supports, refresh their skills, then loop back to Clorinde. One important note is that because Clorinde's skill cooldown is 16 seconds and her enhanced state lasts only 7.5 seconds, even after refreshing your support skills, you may need to fill in some extra downtime before swapping back to Clorinde, especially if you're not bursting every rotation. You can solve this issue by spending more time on the support character, bursting every rotation, or using 4-piece TF to reduce her skill cooldown, but we'll talk more about this tech when we get to the build section. Next, let's cover her Constellations. Clorinde's C1 gives additional coordinated attacks when she hits enemies during her enhanced Night Vigil state. This adds 12 additional hits when she is on fielding, and all of these hits proc her A1. Because of this, her C1 adds a massive amount of damage when compared to C0, making it a generally better pull than her signature weapon. Her C2 is a buff to her A1 passive. As I've explained, her A1 passive is a very important part of Clorinde's damage, so her C2 buffing it makes it a fairly strong constellation. It also gives Clorinde a bit of resistance of interruption. C3 gives her skill 3 levels, which is pretty insignificant all things considered. C4 gives Clorinde's burst extra damage based on her Bond of Life. Because her burst already gives Bond of Life itself, it maxes out the damage bonus on its own, so this constellation just buffs her ult damage. Assuming this damage bonus buffs each of her bursts 5 hits, then it's pretty decent. C5 levels her burst by 3 levels, which is pretty whatever, and naturally C6 is the big one for Clorinde. To summarize it, Clorinde's C6 gives her 10% crit rate, 70% crit damage, 80% damage reduction, and even more resistance to interruption in her enhanced state. In addition, Clorinde performs up to 6 additional coordinated attacks, which again proc her A1 passive. These attacks occur when Clorinde is about to get hit by an attack, or when she uses her enhanced lunge attack. So with her C6, you can expect Clorinde to solo mostly everything in this game. Overall, she's another Fontaine character with strong early constellations, so if you're looking to vertically invest, I would recommend something like C1 over her signature weapon if you're considering damage only. Speaking of weapons, let's cover her best weapon options. Her signature will be her best in slot. 674 base attack, 44.1% crit damage, and the effect just gives her 20% more crit damage and 48 damage percent. Simple signature gives her a lot of good stats. There are, however, a lot of other great weapon options for her. For other 5-star options, Mist Splitter, Haranke Pakufutsu, Light of Foliar Incision, Jade Cutter, and Uraku Misugiri are all fine options, with some of them being better than others in different types of teams, such as Dendro versus non-Dendro teams. For 4-star options, R5 Black Sword will generally be her best option. Crit rate and damage percent is great. Another good 4-star option is Lion's Roar, giving damage percent and attack percent to maximize Clorinde's A1 passive. For free-to-play options, the Fontaine Craftable Finale of the Deep is a great option. It gives attack percent, and because Clorinde easily heals off Bond of Life, you'll be able to easily take advantage of the weapon's secondary effect, gaining even more attack, which is great if you haven't reached that 3000 attack cap on her A1 yet. Iron Sting is also another option for a very heavy EM focused team like Hyperbloom. For artifacts, her overall best set will be the Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy, as she is a Bond of Life oriented DPS, especially in terms of her own personal damage. However, because of the potential downtime issues as explained in her rotation due to her 7.5 second long enhanced state, 4-piece Thundering Fury is a competitive option that potentially smoothens her rotation. I've outlined a general idea of a TF rotation here, where you pretty much fit in 2 instances of Clorinde's enhanced state into one big rotation while refreshing support skills in between. This is just a crude summary of the rotation, however, and to really fully maximize the effectiveness of 4-piece TF, you'll need to do more specific skill orders of your supports, so keep that in mind. Also, 4-piece TF serves to smoothen the rotation and maximize the damage of Clorinde's teammates, so this artifact set does not maximize her own personal damage. Other than those 2 artifact sets, you can run Maru Chisei Hunter if you're planning to run her for Farina, just make sure you don't overcap on crit rate. And lastly, you can use 4-piece Glad or 2-piece if you don't have anything else. Stats wise, very simple. Attack Hourglass, Electro Goblet, Crit Circlet. Substats prioritize crit, attack percent, EM, and then lastly ER. Clorinde has no EM scaling and is heavily dependent on attack for her damage because of her A1 passive, so EM is generally a less important stat. In addition, Dendro teams that run Nahida will already give you EM, so it isn't too important of a stat to build. EM should really only be considered if you're going to be playing Clorinde in Hyper Bloom teams where she is the primary trigger. Even in Aggravate, you really shouldn't focus on EM and prioritize attack. For how much ER you should build depends on the team. Ideally, you want to burst every rotation to fill in her extra downtime in a rotation. Her teams will very likely have Electro Resonance and can run Fisho, so with a 60 energy burst cost, she can run 100% ER and still be able to burst every rotation, so personally, I wouldn't prioritize building any ER. Now let's go over her potential teams. The one thing I want to point out is that as an Electro on-fielder, all of Clorinde's best teams will contain C6 Fischl. Clorinde triggering reactions will continually proc Fischl's A4 and C6, making Fischl do a lot of damage. Her teams are still fine without C6 Fischl, but do keep in mind that her teams will take a hit in damage without her. In my perspective, Clorinde has 2 main team archetypes: Aggravate and Hyperbloom focused teams. These 2 archetypes look to be your strongest, but I will consider some non-Dendro team options that will perform decently at the end. First off, Aggravate. The normal max damage team comp of Aggravate with Nahida, Fischl, and Kazuha is a solid option, and having no healer isn't too much of an issue because Clorinde is able to heal herself. Now, because Aggravate doesn't need that much Dendro application, Nahida can easily be replaced with a shield option like Baiju or Kirara. The resistance to interruption can be helpful since Clorinde doesn't have any SE0. You can also substitute Fischl with Yarobedo and Kazuha with Sucrose for a still solid team. Secondly, Hyperbloom focused teams. You can run Clorinde with Nahida, Fischl, and an off-field Hydro like Xingqiu or Yelan, and the team will be pretty solid. Nahida is less replaceable in these teams because Hyperbloom ideally wants more Dendro application. One option that can make this team better is running Farina as the off-field Hydro slot. Typically, C0 Farina teams basically require a team healer to heal off Farina's HP drain and gain fanfare stacks, so you can run someone like Baiju instead of Nahida for this purpose. However, Clorinde does heal a decent amount with her lunge attack skill, and she performs 5 or 6 of these in a rotation when including her burst. And this healing is enhanced with Farina's fanfare since Farina's fanfare stacks also boost healing bonus. Because of this, Clorinde can easily keep herself alive while proccing overheals, helping to keep the team alive as well without a healer in the team. You will, however, need some extra team healing with Prototype Amber on Nahida, but the result is a very strong healerless Farina team that is able to keep the team pretty healthy from Farina's HP drain. Lastly, I will cover the non-Dendro team options that I think will perform worse than her Dendro ones but can still be decent. First is Overload with Chevres. During the beta cycle, Overload was one of Clorinde's best teams. However, with Clorinde's enhanced state being reduced to 7.5 seconds long now, the resultant downtime hurt the team's performance due to changes in rotation. The team is still fine and can potentially get better if future Pyro support characters are released in Natlan. Electro Charge teams, either with double Hydro or an animal unit, are decent as well. There's nothing too special to say about these teams, just keep in mind that you will likely need to build ER on Clorinde if you're running one Electro character like in double Hydro. And lastly, hyper carry based teams. These teams are alright, but remember that Clorinde attacks with multiple hits with smaller individual damage numbers, so the hyper carry buffs aren't as strong as if you buff a single big nuke of damage like if a Raiden was in her slot. Also remember that Ben's attack buff will get less value if you're going over that 3000 attack cap on her A1 buff. As a result, typically Raiden I would say is better in these types of teams. To conclude this Clorinde guide, I wanted to share share my analysis on her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Clorinde is just another 5-star limited DPS, and she does that job just fine. Her overall strength at C0 is very similar to Raiden at C0, which makes her an average to above average DPS character when considering the other limited 5-star DPSs in this game. My biggest issue with her is that she doesn't really bring anything new to the table in terms of Electro main DPS. If we just consider all of the other Electro on-fielders in this game and their teams, Clorinde's best teams aren't anything different than what the other Electro DPSs have for their teams. And sure, Clorinde does look to deal a bit more damage than the other options with the exception of Raiden, but the difference isn't that big. In addition, her best teams are looking to both be Dendro teams, which does hurt her team versatility a bit until we potentially get better off-field pyro options in the future, for instance. In my opinion, her biggest strength is that she's able to heal herself very well on field by herself, making her a relatively comfortable DPS even without running healers on the team. This is valuable, but other than that, she doesn't bring anything new in terms of team building and the meta. And the DPS of her best teams are pretty much in line with most good teams, but nothing too crazy. Ultimately, Clorinde is a solid Electro main DPS which will do the job just fine, but she doesn't bring anything new and is just another Electro on-fielder, so if you're considering to skip her banner, I don't think you're going to miss out on much if you decide to do so. And that's everything I wanted to cover about Clorinde. I hope this guide and analysis was helpful to you all in giving you a better understanding of everything Clorinde. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video and want to see more guides like this on future characters, and I wish you the best of luck on your Clorinde pools.